let's get started. Welcome everyone to the national rollout of the Jewish Communal Women's Leadership Project. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Meredith Jacobs and I am CEO of Jewish Women International. You know, it feels like yesterday. I was sitting with the senior leadership of JWI, asking ourselves what our response would be to the Me Too movement, what our voice would be in driving equity and safety. So we decided to look within at our Jewish communal world. You know, our Jewish organizations are not immune to harassment or abuse, to inequity. In fact, we also have some very unique challenges when it comes to biases we have in who we consider to be a leader. So we created two programs. One, Men as Allies, that's funded by the Safety, Respect, and Equity Network, which creates conversations among men who serve both as staff and as lay leaders for our Jewish communal organizations around equity, women's leadership. But then we created the Jewish Communal Women's Leadership Project, which is a truly unique leadership program for women at very senior levels of organizations who aspire to the C-suite. We've spent the past year piloting the program, and I have to thank the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington and DRG Search for their partnership. But mostly, I need to thank our incredible pilot cohort. These 13 women truly represent the expansiveness of our Jewish communal world, from startups like Saviva to Jewish museums, local organizations like Gather, the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington, innovative organizations driving new conversations in our community like respectability, communications firms that help our Jewish organizations share messaging, all the way to our legacy powerhouses, JFNA, AJC, BBYO, and Hillel International. I cannot thank these women enough for the intelligence, authenticity, passion, and vulnerability that they brought to each and every session. I am grateful for being able to learn along with you. So before we go any further, I want to recognize our pilot cohort who will continue to meet as a peer group as well as serve as mentors to future classes. They are Lauren Applebaum, Sarah Feinberg, Maharat Ruth Friedman, Rachel Gildener, Marcy Harris Blumenthal, Darcy Hirsch, Samantha Kufferman, Robin Judelson, Malky Karkowski, Michelle Mallett, Ariel Morkowitz, Leah Siskin-Maz, and Shelley Rude Wernick. Thank you all. But none of this would have been possible without the incredible support of the Hadassah Foundation. And I must tell you, the Hadassah Foundation did more than simply give us a grant. They truly walked with us. I'm grateful to Stephanie Blumenkrantz, the foundation's director, for serving as a thought partner and advisor as I thought through the best way to shape this program and continue and expand it in the coming year. And to Meg Gold, a foundation trustee who served as our liaison and who has been a tremendous support throughout this past year. With that, I'm excited to introduce Meg Gold, who will share a few words from the Hadassah Foundation. Meg?
Thank you. When Meredith reached out to the Hadassah Foundation to say a few words, I have to say I jumped at the opportunity. As quick background, I'm sure many of you know, but the Hadassah Foundation was started in 1998 and is now the largest Jewish women's fund in the country. We have awarded $10 million in grants to nearly 110 nonprofit organizations that work with women and girls of all backgrounds in Israel and in the Jewish community in the United States. Our grants and programs focus on four main areas: supporting the leadership advancement of women and girls, breaking that glass ceiling, increasing female political representation, and eliminating religious barriers that create unequal or separate playing fields for women. And I'm honored to be here to represent the foundation for a few main reasons. First, I want to send a heartfelt congratulations to each one of you who participated in the 2019-20 project, and a welcome to those who are considering joining a future cohort. We in the foundation are exceptionally proud that JWI has been a grantee for many years and continues to be through the innovative Jewish Communal Women's Leadership Project. When I look around, I see many of us who are here today were here over a year ago in Addis, Israel, when JWI kicked off this project, and little did we know at the time what this year would bring. But to those of you who applied and were selected and participated in this project, I heard from Meredith, you all did not skip a beat. You jumped into the Zoom conversations, you shared your invaluable perspectives, you challenged and learned from each other and from your speakers. You provided feedback and lessons learned so that JDI could further improve this already successful program in the future cohorts. And overall, you further prepared and positioned yourselves for leadership roles in our Jewish community. And for your success and commitment, especially during these very trying times, we would like to say thank you from the Hadassah Foundation. The second reason why I'm honored to be here today and to recognize each one of you is because our community needs you. We need your perspective, your leadership capabilities, your empathy, and perhaps most importantly, your voice. As you all know so well, an estimated 75 to 90% of the nation's roughly 10,000 Jewish organizations will require new leaders in the next 5 years. And to date, 70% of Jewish communal organizational professionals are women, yet women only comprise 30% of the top leadership positions. We need to change that. In addition, there's about a 70% pay gap between men and women employees in Jewish nonprofits. We need to change that as well. So as you move forward in your careers, as we've seen this past year, there will be some back steps and some side steps, but we have pure confidence that you will make it and you will achieve your goals and step into those positions at the highest level and create Jewish community workplaces that are safe, respectful, and equitable for all. And as you continue this path, we look forward to building upon the friendships and the working relationships that you created this past year. And mostly just want to say again, thank you and Mazel Tov from the Hadassah Foundation. And I do see many other members from the Hadassah Foundation, board members, if you want to raise your hand and wave. So again, thank you. Thank you, Meredith, for your leadership. And we need you. So let's keep going with the next cohort.
Meg, thank you so
much. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to get to our program. Here's what's going to happen. First, we're going to listen to a conversation among some of the graduates of our pilot program about the state of women's leadership in our Jewish communal world. Then I'll come back on and explain what we have planned for our national program, answer any questions you might have. Of course, the graduates of our first year will also be available to answer your questions. And then, of course, I hope you all apply. But first things first, I encourage you, if you haven't already, toggle your screen to speaker view. I'm thrilled to introduce today's moderator, esteemed journalist and opinion editor of JTA, Laura Adkins. Laura, in addition to being opinion editor of JTA, is an adjunct professor of journalism for Yeshiva University's Stern College for Women and a frequent panelist on JWI's Women on the Week news roundup that we host every Friday at noon on Facebook Live. Laura will be in conversation with Lauren Applebaum, Sarah Feinberg, Rachel Gildener, Darcy Hirsch, Samantha Kupferman, Robin Judelson, Malky Karkowski, and Shelley Rude-Wernick. Laura, the Zoom is yours.
Thanks so much, Meredith. We've got a lot of great and not so great things to discuss, but my first question, the headline that sticks out to me the most, I think it was the New York Times, said, the pandemic has set women 10 years back in the workplace. And, that's a scary headline, but I want to unpack some of the ways that women in this cohort have been impacted by the pandemic, but also what organizations have done or have not done to be supportive through this unprecedented time. So Samantha, could you kick us off?
I was thinking about this a little bit in terms of how my sort of day-to-day life has shifted with the transition to working from home and being able to, I think from the perspective of my employer, which is a communications firm based in Washington, to sort of have the flexibility to not work within the confines of the traditional, workday schedule. We're no longer expected to appear somewhere at 9 a.m. and stick around until 6 or 7. It's more about working within whatever setup you have at home to make things work for you and your family. And I guess the beautiful thing for my family is, just having that extra hour in the morning and the evening where there's no commute anymore. We actually do try pretty much every day to take that time with family, take a walk. I have a 2-year-old child, and my husband and I walk with him to his nanny's house and back each day. It's exercise, it's refreshing, it's time outside. That used to be just crazy rush and being in the car and being on the metro. And it's created a way to break up the day in a situation where you could simply be sitting in your house at a desk, kind of with no separation whatsoever.
Yeah, I keep thinking back to that classic movie 9 to 5, and how they showed us way back then that flex hours really do increase productivity and workplace happiness. So it's obviously not under ideal circumstances, but I think a lot of companies are realizing that there are benefits to this flexibility. Darcy, how has your work-life balance, in quotation marks, changed, and how have organizations been supportive for you?
I like the quotation marks. So when we all started working from home last spring, there was no balance. Work was life. It was all encompassing. It was at all hours, having the kids at home, having to juggle pressing deadlines with my family life was really difficult, and it was okay. It felt okay because the work that I was doing felt important, and I also felt fortunate to have a job at a time when so many Americans and those around the world are out of work. And honestly, it wasn't until this fall that I decided I needed to create some boundaries. It was more of a decision that I had to make, that I need to shut off at a certain time of day. I can't be working on the weekends, and the work will get done when it gets done. And some days I'm better at it than others. I think it's difficult for employers when every organization right now is vying for relevance in this economy to let us put things aside. But I think that the modeling needs to come from the top down. We need a time to shut off and shut down. And I think it's a balance we all need to strike.
Yeah, definitely. I think, establishing boundaries and also balancing our organization's relevance is definitely an evergreen challenge. And I guess when it comes to Jewish organizations specifically and the Jewish community, Rachel, can you help us understand some of the unique strengths or limitations that you see within Jewish communal organizations, in particular when it comes to helping women advance into leadership positions and kind of manage these expectations?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think for better for worse, sometimes we think of the Jewish community as separate from the outside influences. And I think in a lot of ways we're not. I think that the Jewish community has the same cultures and challenges of any other nonprofit or any other sector, really, where it is hard to find that equity and for women to advance. What I have found, and I think the Jewish community is doing an incredible job, and I know we'll talk about this in future questions, is because we are a small subset of community, of helping women find one another and really kind of investing in the voices and the networks that allow us to find one another, to gain strength and support. I know this network, we've given each other we've lifted each other up in times when we're all feeling down. And I feel like the Jewish community is, we're so organized that in a lot of ways we're uniquely positioned to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Robin, what do you see from your vantage point?
So I think it's interesting, in the Jewish community, the women really have a huge farm team of professionals that are ready to take the reins and move forward, meaning that we have when I look around and say, okay, who's next? This isn't in some of the sciences or other fields where there's like maybe a woman here and maybe there's a woman there. There are a lot of amazing, very strong, capable women that are ready to jump into positions. I think that's one thing that we have going for us, is that there are a lot of women ready to go. I think the other thing that has been amazing is in the professional sense, and I've worked both in the Jewish community and not, women are really ready to help each other. There really is a sense, and I think that this fellowship, this program has been the perfect example of that women are really ready to jump in and say, how can I help you? What do you need? Who do you need to connect with? Yes, I'm happy to make that recommendation for you. And it's interesting. I think that this does happen more often amongst Jewish professionals. I do want to call out that I do think it is different between the lay and professional relationship than it is between the professional to professional. I have seen, you asked what the weaknesses are, so I'm sorry, I'm going to lay out some of those and not just like tout the wonderfulness, but I've sat on situations where I've heard women who are in a lay capacity say, well, there really isn't anyone here that's ready to be a CEO. But when you look around, there really are. And if you probably ask that same question to many of the female professionals in that situation, they would start naming, there's Rachel, there's Samantha, there's this one, there's that one, and they would go down the line. So I think that while there is an incredible network, professional to professional, that is willing to help each other, unfortunately, I don't think that always transpires between the lay and professional relationships.
I really like the line that you said of how women are ready to take the reins and move forward. And, when thinking how to actualize that vision and, tap into these networks, Malki, from where you sit, what is the biggest, if you could choose just one, what is the biggest concrete obstacle that you see to actually getting more women into these leadership positions in the Jewish community? And, if you could make one substantive recommendation for changing the status quo, what would you do?
Hi, thank you. I'm really happy to be here. I think in reaction to this question, I actually am thinking again about part of the intro that was made, which is how big kind of the population of women in Jewish communal life is, but how they aren't actually in more senior positions. And so I think for me, that's what I think about, which is that we're not necessarily promoting from within. We're looking a lot outside either our organizations or our industries. And there's so much talent within the Jewish communal world that I think we need to start consulting our own kind of, how do we promote from inside our own organizations? How do we promote from inside the Jewish communal industry that already exists? I think there's so much talent that doesn't necessarily get the recognition that it needs. And I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, definitely. Lauren, what do you have to add?
Sure. So I'll go a different direction and take a look at boards. So while a lot of Jewish nonprofits, as Malki said, have a lot of junior female staff, and some even have, women in staff leadership roles, oftentimes there's a huge disparity when we look at boards, especially of Jewish nonprofits. And I really believe that when you have active, engaged boards that are more equitable in all ways, that's going to trickle down to staff, and especially when there's the hiring of the CEO role, where boards of nonprofits are ones making the decisions. And that may mean relaxing some board requirements. Oftentimes in the nonprofit world, boards are seen as a fundraising vehicle. And it may be the case that there could be some awesome, younger Jewish women who would be a great person to be on the board, but they might not be able to give the financial commitment, but they could give something else. And I've served on various Jewish nonprofit boards, and I'm definitely not the one giving a lot of money, but giving of my time or expertise in another area. And I think that boards can be stronger for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the bright spots of this kind of societal reset has been kind of reevaluating the strengths and the qualifications that individuals bring to the table, especially when we're looking at leadership and organizational structures. So in addition to thinking about promoting from within and kind of reimagining who qualifies for a board, Robin and Rachel, are there other concrete recommendations or big obstacles that you see?
Yeah. So it's funny that you say big obstacles, because for me, and I think Malky's heard me talk about this, what I see more and more is that it's like small things that actually become big obstacles. So really the tiniest, and I think it stems from implicit bias, right? Like I think that actually the lack of women leadership and the salary gap, those are all symptoms of this implicit bias where we don't see women as leaders, where we don't look at the strength of who's around us. And I see it play out in really small ways, like who are we promoting as thought leaders? Whose articles are we passing around? Who's taking notes in meetings? Who are we suggesting to be on panels? It's this kind of small, like small microaggressions that really, they're so constant and they happen so much that they take away the confidence of women as seeing themselves as leaders. And so I think one of the ways to repair that is just an awareness, just calling it in or out again and again. And if we can't do it for ourselves, helping do it for others. Because they're small, but I see them taking a big toll as obstacles.
I think also in some ways, while and you started, Laura, by talking about how this situation we're in, how it's been so negative for women, in some ways it has really created space to level the playing field, because I used to sit in meetings and I would make sure that I did not clean up the room when the meeting was over, because every ounce of me wanted to do that. Like that's just like was my thing. And I would not, because I would watch the men do their thing and then walk out of the room. And I was like, forget that. I'm not doing that anymore. So, but I have noticed that like, we're all in the same playing ground. If I work until 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night, no one really knows the difference at this point. I may not have worked for 4 hours in the middle of the day to take care of whatever I needed to do for my family, but I may be working at crazy hours. Like there's a lot of places where the playing ground has had opportunities for me to be able to, you can't see people's faces. So when if you're a gentleman and you're leading the meeting, I can jump in the same way I can, in a different way than when you're sitting at the table and they're speaking. Like if I'm looking straight at, if I'm a man and I'm directing the conversation to another man, and you sort of sometimes the female sit like, what the heck, I'm sitting here, how do I engage in this conversation? On Zoom, it's harder to do some of those things. So you can jump right in a way that it's very different to be able to do when you're in that space. So while there are lots of obstacles in it, and I certainly agree with everything that Rachel has raised, I think that, I guess I'm one that's trying to always look at like where the glass is a little bit full and where can I jump in spaces that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to, or you know what? No one's really going and playing sports these days, and less people are, I know my husband's playing golf all the time, so that's a bad example. But like some of those conversations are going out and having drinks after, some of those, that's not happening for anyone anymore. So the way it takes to make connections is a way that you have to go out of your way to do that, rather than standing around the water cooler. And as females, I think that we're really good at creating that conversation, really good at figuring out how to, connect with people. So I think that some of these, while it's harder as a mom, and that part has really hurt, may have hurt women in the workforce. As a woman, I think that there's created a place that you can step, if you are the kind of person that's ready to step up, it has created space that you can step up and take advantage of opportunities if you're willing to do so.
Yeah, I think those are really astute observations. I mean, I also find personally it's been easier for me to speak up in meetings because I can anticipate better on people's faces, like who's ready to speak, rather than having to, look around a room. You can really be more engaged with everyone, which is sometimes overwhelming. But I do think it's also sometimes easier for women to speak up in that context. Sarah, are there other things that are, either a specific action or events from Jewish organizations that have given you hope for more women joining Jewish leadership positions?
Yeah, so thank you. I think it was mentioned earlier, and I know Meredith called it out in the chat, the Facebook group Year for Jewish Women and Allies that Rachel created a couple years ago now, Rachel, is that right? Year and a half ago, has really been a great place for conversations and a great forum for lifting women up, for calling out both microaggressions and macroaggressions. And what I've really seen happen in that group is people bring forth places where they see injustices, and they use the broad network to try and right them, and to lift people up, to lift women up, to try and create gender equality with salaries, with panels, you know, in all different places. And that has been really just given me a lot of hope. And then the other, I would say, is this group, that to be part of this network over the last year and to meet these really amazing powerhouse women where we each can bring our full selves to the table, and to be able to lean on each other and to network with each other and to break through that barrier of the boys network to create a women's network has really been powerful. And I'm really excited to see it grow and to welcome more women into it and to get to know more women, and just to keep strengthening that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, I guess they're called whisper networks traditionally, but I have seen them grown to a roar in the last several years. You know, we have the Year of Jewish Women and Allies. There's tons of, you know, binders full of women groups after Mitt Romney's famous comments at the presidential debate eons ago, it feels like. So I really do think there are a lot of women who are really stepping up to the plate and are really good at pointing out issues, but also solving them within these groups. But of course, women are only half of the equation here. And there is a broader Jewish community that needs to care about these issues in order for them to actually change. So Rachel, the question I'm asking is kind of like, it's hard to answer, but, you know, is the Jewish community, in your opinion, doing enough to promote both women and other minority groups into leadership positions? And if not, what would doing enough look like?
Yeah. So I'm going to harness some of Robin's honesty here. And also just, I'm impatient, but no, we're not at all doing enough. I think there have been some big strides recently. The emergence of new organizations, new grant pools, you know, again, projects like this that are investing in the pipeline. But overall, like if you look at the 20,000 foot level across the Jewish world, it's actually, I wouldn't say embarrassing, but there's not as much happening as there could be. And, you know, I want to say that I think we need male allies in this. We need men at the top of organizations to notice this and to, you know, rate, like it I think it's this conversation that's happening across the Jewish world as well, is about like, what is the Jewish life that happens locally and what is the Jewish life that happens nationally? We can have pipelines and we can have initiatives, but if on the ground these behaviors aren't changing, and if men and partners and allies aren't stepping up in a like systemic way. So again, I think the other project that JWI is launching with allies is pivotal. I've had the pleasure of getting to talk with some of those groups, and they're understanding what allyship looks like and how to do that on the ground, and having some concerted efforts to engage them in this conversation, in my mind, is a huge place that the Jewish community could be doing better.
Absolutely. Malki, what are you seeing?
I totally agree with Rachel, and so I'm not sure how different my response is going to be, but I'm going to use a recent story that happened with me to kind of illustrate what I think, you know, shares the point. I was recently speaking to someone who's a former supervisor of mine, someone very well known in the Jewish community, very well connected to just like Jewish communal institutions, very involved in leadership development, particularly in the Jewish community. And we were talking about, you know, previous organizations at which I've worked, of which he very proudly shared how there are so many women in leadership roles. And each of them has had a transition recently of the CEO, and none of them has hired a woman. And so for him to be self-congratulatory in certain ways, and this is a man who really is very supportive of women and has tried to promote women across the Jewish community, but for him to feel like that was enough and that he was doing a sufficient job, or like that these organizations had done a sufficient job, to me, actually undermines his comment, because if they haven't hired a woman in those roles, and there are so many women who are qualified and brilliant and deserving of that role, to me it shows that it's just not entering how important it is. In the same way, you know, Kamala Harris becoming vice president has been so amazingly important for, I think, women across the spectrum of like, it still hasn't happened, and you need to be a part of the shift to make it happen, especially at these major institutions that have been part of Jewish life for so many years.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like you're describing the looks presidential problem. Until you have non-white older males being in leadership positions, you're not going to conjure the image of anything else in your head when you think of a leader. So, you know, pushing people out of their implicit assumptions about what a leader looks like definitely requires people that don't look like what they have in their heads to assume those leadership roles. But of course, as Kamala Harris's late mother pointed out, it also requires you paving that path, but also not closing the door behind you. If there's only, you know, one or two token individuals in leadership positions that people can point to and say the problem is solved, we've already had someone who fits those descriptors in a position of leadership, then we haven't actually really changed anything. So I think you're absolutely right in your description. Darcy and Lauren, any other experiences you've had or ways that the Jewish community can be doing more?
Honestly, I think Rachel and Malky said it all. I would like to see us get to a point where we don't say, is this panel diverse enough, right? Like, we haven't done enough until we're at that point where we're not thinking about it. And it's not just about women, it's about race, it's about gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability. We need to get to a point where we don't say, well, there aren't enough women leaders to choose from, there aren't enough Jews of color to choose from in leadership to put on this panel.
100% agreed there in the sense, and I also kind of share a story where it's happened multiple times to me, where I've been asked by bosses, both male and female, in both the nonprofit and kind of for-profit world in the Jewish community, about pregnancy and children plans, and things like that are not asked of potential fathers. And sometimes it happens in the interview stage, sometimes it happens in an annual review. And it happens to a lot, because now where I'm in a position where I have people reporting to me, I've always, made a point of ensuring that doesn't happen. I know it's not going to happen from me, but I have to make sure it doesn't happen from anyone else at my level or above. And I think that is an area. And I'd also like to, in the sense of, talking about the diversity of women, I think is vitally important. I myself have a disability, and 25% of Jewish women do have a disability, and I think oftentimes it's assumed that like women with disabilities can't be in leadership roles. And same thing for Jewish women of color and LGBTQ, et cetera. So just, thinking through that, like, it's not just checking off a box for female staff and leadership and board, but kind of looking at the diversity of these women and ensuring that we're at all levels.
Absolutely. I think you highlighted something very important. And, Meredith and I have talked about this when looking at the leaders who are doing the best in their responses to the coronavirus crisis have been women. And that's not a coincidence. It's not just that we are checking off these boxes, but when we bring people to the table with diverse perspectives, we actually get more diverse solutions to the challenges we're facing, which sounds so obvious, but I think a lot of people have this framework in their head of, okay, we need a woman on this panel and we need a person of color and check, check, check. But you're absolutely right that we're only strengthened as a community when we bring in a diversity of experiences and perspectives. Shelley, shifting gears a little bit, we identified a lot of the challenges that we're facing and potential solutions for them, but I wonder if you could share with us a positive interaction you've had with a male mentor or supervisor that stood out to you as a really positive example of allyship?
I think this question is for, is it for Samantha?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I actually do have what I think is a pretty strong example, and I hope that it is precedent setting. So I work for a company that has a male CEO and a male COO, but many women in leadership, and the majority of the firm are women. But I was the first person to return to work from maternity leave and need a place to pump. The company had never dealt with this before. We were in a sort of sub-suite of a larger suite in the Farragut area. Definitely didn't have an obvious place for this. My office was a shared office that was glassed in. And without having to really explain too much of my needs, I think my boss sort of did his own research. He has 3 kids of his own, but you know, they were much older by that point. Obviously, he hadn't had to go through this experience himself. And he secured for me a private office in a nearby suite. So I had a private, you know, safe place. It had a desk, an office chair, a landline, a window with a shade, a refrigerator, really everything that I would need. And I was actually really impressed. And compared to what I've discussed with a lot of other women, this was a pretty good situation. I'm sure others can relate to different types of setups that they've had in needing to deal with this. And I was really grateful. And I think that the more important lasting part of this experience and sort of my going through this and my boss having to think through the needs was that at the end of last year, when we decided to design a bigger new space for our team and looked for new office space, he actually created a private room within our own suite just for that purpose. And so hasn't needed to be used yet, but it's there, and going forward, you know, we'll have what we need. And I feel like that is such a necessary component of a modern workplace, you know, even when it's a relatively small environment. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. I think that flexibility in responding to a challenge when it's raised is such an important and underappreciated aspect of being a mentor or an ally. Personally, I had an experience when I served as a juror that I will never forget. There was an older white gentleman who had command of the room, and every time someone spoke that did not look and speak like him, he restated what they had said and said, you know, it sounds like you're saying XYZ. And I'm not describing it well maybe, but I actually found it very helpful, because rather than, you know, taking off an idea and passing it on as his own, he really was identifying that he was in a position of power in the conversation and was using that power to reflect the fact that there were other voices in the conversation and attempt to amplify them. So I absolutely think that it's probably a big challenge, as much as it is to identify problems, for those who are in positions of leadership to use their authority to respond appropriately. And I think Samantha pointed out a great example where, you know, it not only solved a problem that one employee was having, but it also hopefully meets the needs of everyone else that comes after her who's in that position. So shifting gears slightly to the reason that we're all here, Malky, I wondered if you could share what the most helpful part of this JWI cohort has been for you personally.
Sure. So I am from this area originally. I moved away for around a decade, and I've spent so far my whole career in the Jewish communal space, and I've known a lot of the women who participated with me in this cohort, and they were, some of them dear friends, some of them good colleagues, but since then, no question, the best part of this experience has been them. I have built stronger relationships with so many of them. I look forward to continuing that building. It's been wonderful to really have a group of women who live locally and are committed to and share values that align with mine. And so that has definitely been, for me, one of the most important things. Rachel also alluded to this, as did Meredith. I had the opportunity to address some of the Men as Allies groups, and being able to engage with them and hear either professionals and or lay leaders and how they're thinking, or volunteers, how they're thinking about it, and giving them the opportunity to kind of ask questions about what it means to be a woman in the Jewish community was also just really beautiful, because it allowed us to learn a little bit more.
Lauren, what about you?
Sure. So, so obviously the guest speakers were really informative and valuable, but like Malky, I think one of the most helpful parts of this program was building this community of supportive women where we can continue to help each other as we go along this journey. Someone put in the chat, that we shouldn't be talking about the first female CEO or, things like that. And I do firmly believe that we're going to be seeing women from this cohort become CEOs of different organizations. And as we move from one stage of our lives to another, to have people that we can continue to talk to. And I think it's also important that for us, this was not just a single year of programming. I think that's what's so powerful of this cohort, and potentially because of the COVID pandemic, that, and I really appreciate Meredith for actively creating that space for it to occur. And so and I think because we went virtual midway, it now allows for this upcoming cohort to be even more inclusive of people who want to have access to recorded trainings and such. And so I think it's a wonderful way of what happens. It really illustrates how we can continue on, as well as bring more people in.
Very well put. Before I turn it back over to Meredith to explain a bit more about the cohort and next year's program, Samantha, Darcy, and Robin, did you have anything to add that differs from what Lauren and Malky just shared?
I would just say, having a safe space to talk about some really complex issues. I was floored by how connected we all were from the very first meeting. I guess that's kudos to Meredith and the others involved in selecting the cohort, but there really was this innate sort of understanding amongst all of us. We became friends, professional colleagues very quickly, and were able to just have these really authentic conversations, which I don't think is always the case in something like this. I don't know. I really think there was some element of magic there in this group. And I completely agree with Lauren that we will maintain a cohort going forward and have the strength of each other to lean on.
I think just to add to this, one of the things I think Meredith really stuck to her guns on was keeping professionals at a certain level in their own organization. So when we came to the table, it's hard to have a conversation with a new associate who's been in the field for a year or two at some of the levels that we've been able to have. So I think having peers that are not just, we all actually are a wide variety of ages, but professionally, I think that you can see we're all in a similar place in our organization. So to be able to say, how do you deal with this in your organization without nervous that away, my organization may suck at this right now, and how maybe you're doing something better, and not worried that someone's going to turn around and say, did you know that BBYO sucks at this, or JFNA or whatever the organization is, being able to ask those questions in a safe way and know that we're all at a particular professional level in the organization. That I think that part really made a difference. And we right away, everyone was open to, hey, you want to grab coffee? Hey, do you want to meet up for this? Hey, Shelly said, let's all jump on Zoom. This is before Zoom was the thing of our communicating, because we weren't seeing each other enough. And we didn't feel we were yeah, you're a speaker, you're great, but we want to talk. And I think that made a really big difference. And even when we met earlier this month, someone said, here, let's talk about this. And everyone had something to contribute. So I think if you're considering this, you really and everyone here is super busy, but I think everyone committed. And I think if you're going to join this group, you have to commit that you're going to be in, because being in with one toe in the water, you're not going to get out of it what we did. And I think that really would be a shame. So I think that really committing and having an amazing group of women like we did made a huge difference.
The last thing that I'll just add is yes, 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 on the network. And as Robin said, we were all at a certain level, but we all came from different sectors of the Jewish community. I've been working in the Jewish communal world for 10 years. I thought I knew everybody. It turns out I really only know the people in the areas in which I've worked, which is a very small proportion. And we all bring different things to the table. And this network has really expanded my horizons too.
Thank you all so much for this bright spot during otherwise dark times. I'm going to turn it back over to Meredith, but I think everyone highlighted some really important, both challenges, but also importantly, solutions to work on and bring forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, all of you. I just keep smiling hearing you all talk, and especially around what I think surprised me the most of this project. I really thought going into it that here we were creating 10 events with, very highly accomplished Jewish women like Danielle Cantor-Jeweler, who is the only female NBA agent who would speak to the cohort about the power of negotiating, or, hearing from Lisa Eisen, hearing from Beth Chardoff, who's a partner at a huge Wall Street firm, talk about navigating male-dominated hierarchies. And yet at the heart of it, what was most important was, as so many of you said, the peer group, that group of women who would walk with you throughout your careers and celebrate and support one another. And that's something that we always talk about doing with our young women. And I think we don't talk enough about doing for our senior level women. And that was also something that was special, was who's talking to the women at the upper levels of our fields. And, the combination of mentors, but also peer networks is so critically important. So I want to thank you all for this conversation. I also want to, Malky and Rachel talked about their experiences with our Men as Allies project. And there were some interesting conversations. I want to share a story that I heard reported back out, which was Malky and Rachel spoke at session 2. And in session 4 of one of the cohorts, the men were asked to work through scenarios. And one of the scenarios said, you learn that the women in your organization make 25% less than the men. How do you respond? And the initial reaction of those participants was to give all the reasons why it was justified that the women should make 25% less. And then the moderator said, what would Rachel and Malky say? And with that, the men got quiet and said, oh. And I also love how they went back to their wives and said, oh my gosh, do you know that men interrupt women at meetings? Did you know that happens? Which I wish I had been, a fly on the wall in their house when their wives just rolled their eyes so hard at them. But I want to thank you all. I also want to acknowledge, I know that I saw that Sarah Shapiro-Plevin is attending virtually right now, and I want to thank her for her work in Gender Equity and Hiring Project to also advance equity in the Jewish communal world. So now I want to turn to what we have planned for next year. We're going to offer 2 options. One is to be a part of a cohort similar to what these women experienced. There is an application. There will be an interview process. In fact, the women of the cohort will be part of participating in interviewing you. We will also have, once again, Dara Clarfield, CEO of DRG Search, to be a part of that selection process. Someone asked in the chat how we identify senior level women. It's really women who the next step is a C-suite position, whether that means CEO, CFO, CMO, somehow among the top most senior positions in their organization. You will have 10 virtual conversations with highly accomplished Jewish women. I want to note that our first group of speakers was not diverse. And we we are prioritizing changing that for this next year. You will hear from women, from disabled women, from LGBTQ women, from BIPOC women. So we will make sure that our speakers represent the fullness of our community. After those, and you will also get to, after the speaker presents, there will be a conversation that you will be a part of that will be interactive, where you can learn from each other and be in conversation. 2 weeks later, you will be put into a cohort based on where you live. And I know that we have women from around the world who are interested in applying this year. So we will have multiple communities. Where this was one cohort of 13, we are going to create many, many, many communities across the country and the world. And so 2 weeks later, you will meet, you will be given some sort of a reading, whether it's a book or an article or a video, and then given a discussion guide to have a conversation, and that will allow for that bonding within your peer cohort. So that's what it looks like for option 1. Option 2, which is a little different, is to allow anyone who wants to just sign up and get a recording of the sessions, but not the conversations. So if you want, there's no application process, you just register and sign up, and you will be given a code where you can access a library of these kind of master classes from the women talking about women's leadership. And just so you know, we really take a very much of a gendered lens. So you're going to be talking about male-dominated hierarchy, identifying and nurturing the next generation of leaders. What we really want you to think about is what's needed to create a major voice for yourself, to position yourself to get those top positions. But then once you're in a position of power, how you create a new workplace that is equitable for all. With that, I want to learn if anybody has, if you can drop in the chat any questions that you might have, either about the program or for anyone who spoke. You can also reach out to me privately at mjacobs@jwi.org, and you can access more information and the application at jwi.org/JCWLP, and you will be emailed the links. We will close the applications on December 15th. We'll have interviews through January, and the program will start in February. Rachel asked if she can participate again. Rachel, you're not going anywhere. We are going to create an organization, a way for all of you to continue learning together, as well as make you very much a part of mentoring the next group of women. So we really envision just a pipeline of women leaders. And what I want to see in a very short amount of time is women who go through this project are becoming the leaders of our organizations. And as someone said earlier, I'm not talking about just small social justice organizations or women's organizations. I'm not going to be happy until we have a woman CEO of JFNA, Hillel International, BBYO. You know the groups I'm talking about. Women need to be at the top of our largest Jewish organization. Someone just asked, we anticipate option 1 will be approximately the same size cohort as last year. No, again, we are going to have as many women as qualify throughout what I'm envisioning is multiple cohorts running at the same time. So you will be all part of the learning classes that we'll hold once a month for 10 months. And then the 2 weeks later, you will be put into a smaller peer cohort so that you have the kind of connections that the women in this group spoke about. So we could have 100 women participating from across the world, but then run 10 smaller cohorts that are the peer groups. Ruthie asked, if you're not selected for option 1, can you default to option 2? Absolutely. You absolutely can. But again, our goal is to we wanted to keep this pilot year small. We learned a lot from the group, But we want to go big. We want this to be accessible to as many women as possible. So please apply, reach out to me. Some of the women are putting into the chat. If you want to reach out to them and ask questions, please do so. And yes, Malky, when there are 9, we're going to echo RBG's quote. So with that, I want to thank everyone for attending. You will be emailed out links to everything, as well as a copy of this recording. And I hope you will all consider joining us a week from this Friday on December 4th. JWI we're not able to hold our Women to Watch luncheon this year, but we are having an inspiring half-day women's leadership conference, our Women to Watch Impact Summit. It will be, gosh, like 5 hours of unbelievable learning opportunities. We don't expect you to be on the call for the entire day, but please join on and off throughout the day. You'll have access to the recording throughout the year. And then afterwards, we're going to have hopefully the world's largest virtual Shabbat candle lighting, and then break into some Shabbat happy hours featuring a what's it called? A featured drink that we'll have, our Bold and Badass vodka drink. So I hope you'll all join us. To register for that is jwi.org/WTW. Thank you again to Meg Gold, Stephanie Blumenkrantz, and the entire Hadassah Foundation. To Laura Adkins, thank you, my friend. I am grateful for you. And to our incredible cohort of women leaders, I look forward to serving beside you for many, many years to come, and to shaping a new Jewish community that is truly safe, respectful, and equitable for all. I thank you for sharing this afternoon with us. I look forward to seeing you again, and happy, healthy Thanksgiving.